Hello, my name is Chasen Stern, and I chose to do my final project on how AMC's Mad Men is changing television. Historically, film has always been the more celebrated, critically acclaimed older sibling of television. For decades, the film medium had the most well-known stars, the biggest budgets, and the largest audiences. Movies were celebrated by critics and beloved by the general public. Television showed up a few years later, and after a while, what started as an exciting new form of entertainment became lackluster and boring. Even the invention of color TV did not help television compete with the large-scale, glamorous film industry. Television limped along decade after decade, producing the same formulaic genre shows, never garnering the same respect as film. Legal dramas, police procedurals, hackneyed sitcoms, and later repetitive, nauseating reality television filmed primetime slots for years, forcing audiences to simply stomach subpar entertainment. This all changed at the turn of the 21st century. Premium and cable channels began to produce some of the strongest material ever seen on the small screen, which impressed both critics and audience members alike. Original and innovative dramas began to improve television's reputation, allowing the medium to compete both critically and commercially, to some degree, with films. These programs included AMC's Mad Men and Breaking Bad, which followed in the footsteps of much-lauded dramas like HBO's The Sopranos and The Wire. For this presentation, I will mainly be focusing on Mad Men, as it is an exceptional piece that epitomizes this recent wave of ambitious, nuanced television that is subverting traditional formats and helping to shape a world in which interesting, thought-provoking content is available through any medium. AMC first aired Mad Men in 2007. It was the network's first original program. Since its inception, the show has more than doubled in viewership, won 4 Golden Globes, 15 Emmys, including 4 consecutive Best Original Drama wins. Nearly every aspect is acclaimed and awarded for excellence in its particular area. Quote, "The network was looking for distinction in launching its first original series, and we took a bet that quality would win out over formulaic mass appeal," end quote, said AMC Network's president Ed Carroll in an interview with the New York Times. By focusing on details, Mad Men's creator Matthew Weiner and his production team have created an impeccable depiction of a visually distinctive era that sets the tone for stories that are unique to television and equally ambitious as period piece films. From the day drinking and womanizing to the excessive smoking in distinguishing fashion, the show aims to encapsulate the 1960s in every possible way. Quote, "The show's design, the almost fetishistically accurate sets and costumes, has been lauded from the start," end quote, says journalist Alex Witchell in her article, "Mad Men Has Its Moment." Despite the acclaim for the show's set design, Weiner still contends that its strong writing and compelling story should be credited with its success. Witchell writes that, quote, "It's the universality more than the period that's the hook, of course. Absent the Surgeon General's warnings, Stainton's, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employment discrimination based on race, religion, or sex, the people on this show struggle with some backbiting coworkers, unhappy marriages, and ongoing searches for the meaning of life that we do now. We'd like to think that things were simpler then, but what's hard now has always been hard." End quote. Mad Men's appeal can be traced to a number of reasons. Regardless of which one chooses to agree with, they all share similar characteristics. Every element of the show is produced, designed, or performed with great care and detail. As previously mentioned, these various components do not go unnoticed, as Mad Men is consistently nominated and wins numerous awards. Each episode cost $2.3 million to produce, and with 13 episodes to a season, the production budget alone reaches that of a small film. After nearly a year of negotiations, Weiner and AMC finally settled the contract dispute, and Mad Men returned this past spring. Weiner received a raise, and the show received a significant budgetary increase. The already impressive writing, production, and performances only benefited from more financial freedom. Another fascinating aspect of Mad Men's portrayal of the 1960s is its depiction of gender roles. The show goes about this through two methods. The first is by depicting certain characters in a very stereotypical fashion in order to highlight and emphasize the sexism and mistreatment of women during this period. The second method is a complete subversion of expected gender roles. The writers and producers introduce characters that absolutely defy gender expectations and act as a radical juxtaposition to the stereotypical female characters. January Jones's character, Betty Draper, is the standard model for a docile 1960s housewife. She's in her late 20s to early 30s, unemployed, and is living in the suburbs of Ossining, New York, with her ad executive husband, Don Draper, played by John Hamm, and their two children. After graduating from high school, Betty had a short career as a model in New York City before meeting Don and giving it up to start a family. Her quiet disposition and complete conformity to social formalities create the perfect housewife image she rigorously strives to achieve. Her goals and wishes revolve completely around the serving and pleasing of her husband. Betty's facade of perfection is everything that a homemaker is believed to be. She is still young, beautiful, an able cook, an avid churchgoer, and can flawlessly care for her children and husband's additional needs. On the surface, Betty seems to have it all and is a paradigm for a mid-20th century woman living the American dream. On the other hand, Peggy Olson represents the antithesis of Betty Draper. She is an unparalleled, unique woman living a lifestyle many years ahead of her time. However, her origins were very similar to that of Betty Draper. After her graduation from high school, Peggy attended secretarial school and became a secretary at Sterling Cooper Ad Agency, where she worked the desk of Don Draper. As a secretary, Peggy's role was fairly still stereotypical, being that it is one of the only professions women held at the time. Peggy begins to subvert gender stereotyping when she is promoted to a prominent position as a copywriter, a position only held by men. She is quite talented and becomes a key asset to the agency. As for her personal life, Peggy continues to subvert stereotypes of the era. She lives alone in an apartment in the city, against her mother's wishes, dates different men, has premarital sex, does not attend church, and after having an affair with an engaged coworker, has an abortion. All of these traits and beliefs contrast not only to Betty's traits and beliefs, but to those of the society of the time as well. Even in a modern setting, some would still consider Peggy's actions radical. In Images That Injure, the authors discuss the two different types of harm that stereotypes in the media can have. The first classification is, quote, direct harm, being killed, being caused pain, being disabled, or being deprived of pleasure or opportunity, end quote. The second kind of harm is caused by the media is, quote, indirect harm, such as when someone breaks a promise to you or deprives you of duty, end quote. Gender stereotypes can often have both direct and indirect effects on its audience. Women may view themselves as unattractive compared to the slender, made-up, and glamorous actresses that they see on a television program or in a movie. The pressure to live up to these societal expectations could deprive these women of pleasure and lead to a poor self-image and direct harm. Seeing the exact same image of gorgeous women in the media subconsciously reinforces the idea of what beauty truly is. Additionally, indirect harm occurs, quote, when the person harmed is not aware of having been harmed or the harm caused is more dilute, as is the case with deception, end quote. False promises and impossible expectations are common elements of indirect harm caused by the media. Both categories of harm are detrimental to the audience being exposed to them, both men and women alike. Despite the fact that Mad Men takes place in the 1960s, the stereotypical portrayal of Betty Draper as the average suburban housewife can still cause both direct and indirect harm. Her stunningly gorgeous appearance is the epitome of what is considered beauty. Throughout the series, she is complimented for her attractiveness and even compared to Grace Kelly on multiple occasions. This constant reinforcement of the perfect woman creates the deprivation of pleasure and satisfaction with oneself. On an indirect level, some women may subconsciously strive to have this seemingly perfect life of Betty Draper. Her ability to control the various aspects of her life with such grace, while retaining her beauty, is an impossible goal or expectation that is not feasible outside the fictional world of television. The subversion of female stereotypes through Peggy Olson is much more realistic representation of women. She faces real-life situations and problems and is often forced to make compromises such as sacrificing her personal life for a successful career. She is not unattractive, but she is not comparable to Grace Kelly either. Furthermore, Peggy Olson is more relatable to the modern working woman than Betty Draper is. Peggy does not create false promises, nor is she unobtainably gorgeous. She is a 21st century woman living in a sexist, repressive decade that is trying to hold her back. Although programs such as Mad Men are works of fiction and characters such as Betty Draper and Peggy Olson are fictional themselves, a great deal of importance is placed on whether the characters and the gender that they represent are being fairly depicted. In Media, Gender, and Identity, author David Gauntlet searches for an explanation of this importance. He states that, quote, "In modern societies, people typically consume many hours of television each week, look at magazines and other publications, surf the internet, pass billboards, go to the movies, and are generally unable to avoid pop culture. It seems obvious and inevitable, then, that we will be affected by these experiences somehow." End quote. If every piece of information or fiction that is presented to the public on a daily basis contained a blatant offensive stereotype, it would not be long before the population began to believe these stereotypes. It is the ethical responsibility of producers, filmmakers, authors, editors, and other artists to be careful with their depiction of race, gender, religion, and other traits and characteristics that define human beings. In conclusion, Mad Men's meticulous attention to detail, nuanced character portraits, articulate storytelling, impeccable set designs, and strong performances from every member of the cast has created a truly unique program that has the creativity and ambition to break down television conventions and pave the road to the future for the television medium. The show's use of stereotypes to critique not only the 1960s, but our modern culture as well, is a postmodern technique that brings to light gender issues without sacrificing its entertainment value. While the film industry begins to rely on gimmicks such as 3D conversions and innumerable sequels, it is refreshing to realize that there are artists, like Matthew Weiner, in the television industry who rely on nothing more than their superior storytelling abilities. With ever-increasing ratings, continuous critical acclaim, and a die-hard fan base, it is becoming more and more apparent that other networks and producers will follow Mad Men's example, as it is changing television for the better. Thank you for listening to my presentation.